I just asked her. We decided to get on. Alright. Good evening, everyone. Sorry for the delay. Welcome to the Board of Education special workshop meeting. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sort of. Hello. Can you hear me now? Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Education special workshop meeting. Today is Tuesday, May 6th, 2025. The time is now 5:46. Apologies for the delay. So with me this evening, I have board members Howard White, Ashley Goulias, Mary Ellen Flaherty Ludwig, Sherry McCready Pritchett. I also have Dr. Alexandra Estrella and her cabinet this evening. If we could all stand for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, and with that, I will transfer the meeting to Dr. Sterling.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us as we come together to start the process of closing out the 24-25 academic school year. Today is a great opportunity for us to come together. There's
I know, I don't know.
to come together and look at where we are, not only in the budget process, as well as some of our data points that we've collected thus far around our panorama survey, but also an opportunity to hear from you. What are some of the things that have gone well this year in your schools? What are some of the things that you have as recommendations for us as we continue to develop and plan forward for the 25-26 academic school year? The first item that we will be presenting this evening is providing you with an update of where we are in the budget process. As you know, this year has been quite a challenge in us being able to balance our budget. We came forward to the board with a 9.7% request. At that time, we had already made some significant reductions, particularly in central office, to get to 9.7%. And as you know, the city approved a 4% increase for the district. Consequently, the school leaders alongside the central office finance team, as well as others within the leadership team, have worked tirelessly over the scope of the past several months to creatively find ways to make reductions to get to that 4%. We had to reduce our budget by approximately close to $14 million, and that is a significant ask of the system. At this point in time, we are still working to balance the budget. We were trying to work with the city in terms of finding additional funds to help us, particularly one of the things that we know we value as a community is our arts. And unfortunately, as part of the reductions that we've had to make, that's an area that has been impacted, particularly at the elementary school level. For the exception of maybe two schools that have an art focus, all of our elementary schools across the organization have had to make reductions in this area. Some by collective agreement amongst the school, and others where when we saw that we still were not at the target But notice that most of our elementary schools had made this reduction. We asked those schools that had not to make that reduction. And now, right now, we don't have any strings or bands at the elementary school level. We have our traditional music program, but these components that we really enjoy seeing our kids engaging and participating in, unfortunately, were things that we had to eliminate from the budget. We're still not at the target, so we're still working with our school leaders, and we tried working with the city and trying to find additional resources. We haven't received any confirmation yet that that is something that will happen. And at this point, given our collective bargaining agreements, we really need to move forward in balancing the budget with the resources that we currently have. One, because we owe it to the members of our team that might be, we call it the RIF process, which is a reduction in force process that we go to based on seniority. Those people that could potentially be unemployed at the end of the process deserve to know as soon as possible so that they have an opportunity to find employment elsewhere if it winds up being that they're in that situation. And it's quite a complicated process for us because not only are we looking at what's happening with teachers, we're also looking at paraeducators, we're looking at administrators system-wide. So one of the things that you might experience next year is the administrators that are in your schools now might not be the same administrators that will be there in September. And that is because of seniority and undesired, I guess that's the best way to put it. I am obligated to shift people based on their seniority, and that will inevitably create a ripple effect in the organization. We will try to minimize the impact across the organization as best as we possibly can, but I want you to know that this will be a possibility as we go through this extensive process, because of the amount of cuts we've had to make is impacting the entire system. And it will have an impact in terms of who is in your schools. So part of our conversations with our school leaders have been the importance of next year rebuilding culture and reestablishing norms at the school level, because we want to make sure that the atmosphere and special qualities that every school has continue to stay alive in the midst of this significant transition that the entire organization is going to be experiencing. But I'm going to turn it over now to Mr. Osmani so that he can provide a more detailed description of where we are in the budget process, and then we'll open it up to questions. We don't need a mic up there, right? No. Oh, and if the board would like, you can join one of the tables and then we can come back here to close out the meeting. I think that works for the board.
Evening, can you hear me? I don't have a clicker, so I'm going to be somewhat stuck in this space, but I'd like to follow up on the superintendent's comments and just give you a brief overview of where we are with the budget. For many of you, this will be a refresher, but we've been having ongoing conversations. But before I get into the presentation, I do want to first and foremost thank all of the parents, members of the SGCs. We have started engaging with you in this process since the beginning of the budget process. So thank you for your advocacy. Thank you for showing up at the meetings. Thank you for coming to the town halls. And some of you we've interacted via email requesting additional information. So I really do want to thank you as leaders of your SGCs for leading that effort in getting our parents involved. I also want to thank members of the Board of Ed. This has been a challenging year. You guys have been there with us. We've had multiple meetings in committee and with staff and workshops, so I do want to thank you all as well. And then obviously you, the school leaders that are here in the building, working with your schools. This has been challenging for you, and we all recognize that. So I also want to thank you for some of these very tough decisions you've had to make. They have not been easy. So with that, just to kind of give you a brief update, we know I talked about the budget process. Our calendar is cyclical. We begin this process in October with what we call pro forma budgets, getting a sense of where are we, how we begin the year, and we start building the budget that way. In November, we send out requests to our departments and our support services to start putting in their requests based on trends that they're seeing, based on contractual obligations that we have, things like transportation contracts, custodial contracts, security contracts. There are things that we already know that we're obligated to do. So we start gathering that information around the November timeframe. Then once we get all that information, the team and the staff sit down with the superintendent to put together a recommendation of the budget based on the information that we have at that time. With that information, we go to the Board of Education and they approve what we call a tentative approved budget, which was a 9.7% request that was referenced. And then with that, we submit that to the city, into the city budget process around January. And so then we take part in that conversation with the city stakeholders. Around January, actually around February, we start the process of working with our schools to develop what we call our student-based budgets. This year, given the challenges that we knew were coming, we actually started this process earlier than we had in the past. And therefore, we started engaging with the schools based on trends that we were seeing, how we can start building these budgets. So we've been working with the schools since then. During that time, in February or March, that's when we got indication. The mayor makes the recommendation, the city CFO makes the recommendation, the town council, common council puts together their budget cap, and then goes through that process. So this is when we found out that we were capped at 4%. So part of this conversation we'll be having with schools and with central office is how do we get from the 9.7 request to the 4% request, given what we know. So that's kind of been the process that we've been engaging in. And we're now towards the tail end, as the superintendent mentioned, in past years, even after the budget has been approved, which was actually last night, the BET took final action on the budget and set the tax rate at 4% for the Board of Ed. We typically try to have these other conversations with the city for some supplemental funding that could be used to assist us in making that reconciliation from the 9.7 to the 4%. But we're kind of running out of time because on June 3rd is when the Board of Ed has to approve our final reconciled budget. So at that point, it has to tie to the 4%. If there are other sources of funding, then we would apply that to the 4%. But if there aren't, then that is the budget that we're legally required to approve. So we have about another 3 or 4 weeks before we get to that date. So it's going to be a real busy time for us because, as Superintendent mentioned, we're not quite there yet. And so this information I'm just going to skip it. It's just kind of overview of the district. We are just under 11,500 students. We have multiple schools and multiple opportunities for our students to learn. But this is really our why. This is why we go through this process, is for this chart right here. So it kind of summarizes the mission and the business that we're in. So before I get into the operating budget, I want to briefly share the capital budget, which was approved in April. We had a number of projects that we wanted to fund this year through the capital budget. The capital budget is funded through, we borrow money, the city, through its bonding authority, and that's how we pay for these projects. Capital projects are essentially longer term projects. Think of buildings and facilities, those assets that don't really move around. Board of Ed is kind of unique because we also include some curriculum and technical materials as part of our capital budget. But our initial capital budget request this year was $7.4 million. that we went through the process and submitted to the city. During this process, the city reached out to us and said, you know, we're looking at the entirety of the capital request, not only at the Board of Ed, but also the city request. And at this time, to meet our cap, we can only fund about 6.9 million of the 7.4 million that we requested. And therefore, we internally had a conversation, how do we trim down from the 7.4 to the 6.9 million? And so we made those decisions internally and how we got to those numbers. So we shaved off a couple of projects, but we were able to get there to 6.9. So things are included in the capital budget. We have security items, we have curriculum and textbooks, we replace student computers, we are a 1-to-1 district, so with 11,500 students, at minimum we have 11,500 devices. These have replacement cycles, and so each year we plan for their replacement. We talked about band and string instrument replacement. This is a program that we have been working on for quite some time, and so we had funding for that. Technology, networking equipment. Last year, we engaged on replacing lockers at our middle schools. This is actually somewhat of a success story because last year we had requested 500,000 with the understanding in a 4-year period, we would do one school for each. When we went out for bids last year, we were actually able to get a bid for school at 250,000. So we were actually able to have plans to replace lockers at 2 middle schools as opposed to 1. And therefore, this year, when we made this request for the 3rd school, instead of $500,000, we put in a request for 250 at that lower rate. And so that was also approved. And so with that, we have one more school, I believe West Rocks, should be on that list after we're done with these other schools. And there's some other factors. And then we have things like roof repairs and things like that. And then a big one this year is asbestos abatement at Wolfbit, that is also on this list. But that kind of summarizes where we are with the capital budget. I think for the most part, we were able to get funded most of what we had requested and for in terms of the capital budget.
Have you ever heard some questions about the capital budget before we move on? I know we've spoken about it a lot, but just want to make sure. Thank you.
So next now, obviously the operating budget, this is kind of the bigger conversation. This is the side of the budget that funds our day-to-day operations. One of the things that we've wanted to do for the past couple of years is we did get feedback that, please provide us information that's easily accessible, that's readable. And so we set out by creating this budget book, different from what we've created in the past. So it includes things like the superintendent's message, overview and highlights. We talk about significant changes from prior years. Because each state is funded differently, funds their public schools differently, we also include information on how public school funding works in Connecticut. So there's a whole section that talks about that. We discuss factors that are influencing this year's budget is also included in this budget book. And then section 3, obviously, as the CFO, is the section that I'm really proud of, is we provide a lot of detail in the budget, line item detail. We do 5-year history, detail for our local budget, for our grant budget, and for our fund budget. We have information on the school's budget. We talk about the grant budget, and also the fund that funds our school lunch program is also included in this budget. And then obviously, as I mentioned earlier, we're in the business of educating children. We also have a very robust, what we call the informational section. So in this section, you will find historical information regarding our school academic achievements. We talk about our enrollment projections looking forward and also looking back at what our enrollment has been. And then we also, because having the district funded, 80% of our budget being personnel, we always have questions on personnel trends. Where do these people work? Where do these people live? And so we also provide a detailed staffing information, a 5-year history of funding positions by positions. We also do a 5-year history by location. So if you wanted to know what's happening, what are the trends at Brookside Elementary, you could see a 5-year history of Brookside Elementary. What is the trend in the finance department? You could see a 5-year trend in the finance department. So we get to that level of granularity within the information. So all of this information is available in the budget book. We also created a designated website page thanks to our communications team. that provides not only the budget book, but every single presentation that we made that relates to the budget is available on the budget page of our website, and this QR code gets you there as well. So one of the things that we have really worked hard to do is just to be transparent and open and provide as much detail as possible. And even with this information there, we also field questions and provide supplemental information when it is requested of us. So just to recap, before I get into this year's budget. So last year, we started with a budget of 226 million. The year before, we put in a request for 8.2%. And as we're doing this year, we had to go through this process last year, because last year we were approved at 3%. So last year we made a series of reductions to get us to that 3%, which we did, and the board approved in June. So there are a number of position reductions. We did not reduce as many school positions last year. We did make some reduction in central office. About $670,000 worth of positions from central office were cut last year to get to this reconciled budget. And then obviously I talked about the timeline. We have had numerous engagements with the public going back to September, and now up until yesterday, Monday, May 5th, was the final action on the budget. But this is kind of how we engage with the public. We have had public hearings. This year we did something different. We had 2 community town halls. We had one in October and one in November, where we actually engaged with the public again. But this kind of summarizes just the process that it takes to get to this point. There we go. So where are we now? So as the superintendent mentioned, the budget that we presented to the board, the superintendent's recommendation was 9.7%. The Board of Ed approved a tentative budget of 9.7%. The mayor made a recommendation of 4%. Common Council kind of upheld that 4% rate. And the BET last night finally approved the 4%. What does that mean in terms of our request? It means that we are $13.2 million short. What they approved was $13.2 million less than what we had requested. And so that's kind of where we are now, is reconciling the budget, reducing our request by 13.2 million to get to that 4%. The challenge with that is, as I mentioned before, that we are 80%, our budget is almost 80% up. And this chart kind of shows you where our personnel reside within the district. So you can see that positions that are locally funded, elementary schools have the highest number of positions, followed by the high schools, followed by the middle schools. We also have instructional support. So this is your curriculum department, your SPED department that work in support of the schools. And then you also have things like your facilities, your transportation department. These are the people that, when something breaks down at the school, this is who we call to come to your buildings. So what I've circled here accounts for about 97% of our total staffing in the district. So when you have to make reductions in staffing, it is really hard to make the level of reductions that we're talking about based only on the 3% of staffing. You invariably will have to touch positions in the schools, just because that's where our people are. We don't have that many people that live outside of schools. And as I mentioned before, last year when the reductions were not as significant, we were able to make most of those reductions outside of schools. Those reductions were made mostly in central office or support areas, but this year is unlike last year, where there is no way that you could reconcile this budget without making those adjustments. So this is kind of where we are today. I updated these numbers this morning. So we started off with 233 million is the budget for this year. The BOE approved a budget of 255 million, a little over 256 million actually. The budget cap was set at 242 million, so the gap that we have to fill is 13.4 million, right? However, we did have to make some adjustments that actually made that gap bigger. We found out, and this is typically when we found out in April, we received our insurance rates, our renewal for insurance. We have two plans currently. Some employees are on the state plan, which went up 11%. The majority of our employees are in a Cigna plan, our teachers. They transitioned out of the state plan and moved to the Cigna plan. The Cigna plan went up 15%. And it also went up 15% last year. So whereas we are working to reduce our budget, the budget was actually increasing because these costs were increasing. So with that increase, we have been working with the schools. So far, we have been able to reduce about 14.5 million from all the schools combined. You saw I believe at the last board meeting, we did some additional central office reductions by reorganizing the SPED department that generated about 860,000. But then you also see that we had to add the $2.4 million for insurance. Our initial budget proposal had drawing down $2.5 million from what we call carryover funds. But because of trends in spend this year, we are actually drawing down that $2.5 million this year. So it is therefore unavailable for us to balance the budget next year. So we had to recalculate our budget to put that back in because that $2.5 million that we were planning on using is at zero. Actually, as of today, it's about at 169,000. So that $2.5 million is unavailable. So that also added to some of the challenges. But if you do the pluses and minuses, we were able to reduce the budget by 9.9 million. We are about $3.4 million short of where we need to be, and we have about 3 and 4 weeks to close that gap. So that's kind of where we are right now. As the superintendent mentioned, we are fortunate that the state is looking at special education. There is some legislation making its way that we're watching that could provide us additional funding to offset special education costs, but it's not going to be 3.4 million. We know that. At best, we may be looking at $1 million additional funding from the state, which leaves us with about a $2.4 million gap that we still have to fill. And with that, don't want to take up too much of your time, but I will open for questions. This slide talks about grant funding because we do receive grants from the state as well coming through us, but the number of the value of grants has decreased. So this chart, you'll see that in FY25, this current year, we had about $34.6 million available in grant funding. This year, we only have about $30.6 million available. So we're also seeing decreasing in grants funding. And obviously, you're hearing what's happening at the federal level and some of those uncertainties. We're hoping that the $30.6 million stays this way, but that is a number also that could change depending on what happens with changes over at the federal level as they relate to education grants. And so that is my update. And with that, I'd like to open it up for questions.
Concerning the special ed, that amount, is that
Thank you.
concerning the special ed, the amount that we have up there, is that including benefits as well? Was that salaries and benefits or just benefits?
That is salaries and benefits.
So 2 questions for you. In the adjustments that you've made, the 14 million or 14.6 million, is there further detail in the package that's available online in terms of what makes up that 14.6 million that we could see or access to?
Sure.
But I understand it.
So yes and no. Yes, there is a detailed package in that. That $14 million also includes positions. We are currently working with the unions to identify and notify people. So it will become available in about 3 weeks exactly what those positions are. But I can roughly tell you, there's some coaches in there's some teaching positions. The superintendent mentioned there were band and strings positions, so that kind of gives you a high level of share that information to that level of detail. But if you want to know what areas have been impacted, I could share that. So
That will
Sure.
helpful.
and in HR, in operations, in information technology are included. We do have positions in not facilities, we don't think we have any. Curriculum and instruction, other positions that are impacted by this. So these cuts are across the board in multiple departments.
And then, sorry, my second question was the remaining approximately 3.5 million that has to be reconciled. Can you provide any insight into where you think that might come from?
So at this point, it's obviously you saw the chart of where the money is spent. And so we're looking at state grants and special education, so that may provide some. But the $2.5 million hole that we have left, we may have to go back to schools and to central office departments and look at additional reductions. Part of the challenge is rising special education costs. What we have done this year that we hadn't done in the past 2 years to reconcile the budget, we have somewhat underfunded special education with a hope that we could generate salary savings over time. That's proven extremely challenging. And so this year we have fully funded our expected special education expenses. So that does limit some of the options, but that's kind of what we're working on in the next 3 to 4 weeks. I don't know yet, to be honest, where these adjustments will be made, but it is with working with the administrators in this room to figure out how we get from this point to that 4%.
Once the budget's finalized and all the positions are identified, is there gonna be any sort of output in terms of how it impacts the day in the life of the student? So for example, for your non-special education student, last year, a student's day looked like this, now it looks like this. For a special education student, it used to look like this, now it looks like this. And I ask because hearing about positions as a parent doesn't mean a lot to me, but if you tell me what it means from an outcomes perspective, it helps kind of paint the picture a little bit better. So is there a plan to outline what it looks like practically for our students as a result of all these changes, so we can then report back to the city and say, hey, this is the impact of you taking us from here and bringing us down here?
I see the superintendent has raised to answer that question.
So we can definitely create that. If you remember back in COVID, we created the day in the life of a student and the impact of COVID and how we were managing to keep students safe. So we can do something similar, showing the before and after, so that you can see the impact of how the resources have limited. I think it's multiple folds because there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes that support students that will have an impact in their progress. So we can create demonstrations of like the day in the life of certain resources also that yielded supports for students as well that a parent might not see in the day of the life of a child that I think are also important to highlight. Because in terms of staff development, additional supports, and resources, we've lost a lot of those entities within the organization, either through the loss of personnel or loss of resources, that I think it's important to elevate so that people can understand the impact and magnitude of the effects that these reductions will have in our organization. And a good example of that is, for instance, our school counselors might not necessarily impact every child, but that's a resource that we're losing in many of our elementary schools that we worked really hard to bring into our elementary schools during the pandemic. And you will see later when Diane Filardo presents on the Panorama Survey that we've had really positive gains as a result of a lot of these resources. So we don't know what will happen next year, that these resources will be depleted. Even though a lot of the supports that we've built have yielded really positive outcomes, and you'll see some of it tonight when we present the Panorama Survey.
Did I answer your question?
So my question's a two-part. One, it seems like, and if I'm recalling correctly from the budgets, it seems like one of the expenses that keeps going up year over year is the salaries, and I think it's mostly driven by having that staff that can help support the multi-language learning. Is that about right?
No, not quite. The majority of our staff actually are not MLL staff, but it really is contractual obligations. We have 2,000 employees. Of those 2,000 employees, about 1,100 are teachers. And so all across all subjects. And so that is a driver as well, because we have salaries and benefits that are contractually agreed upon. We have health insurance cost that goes with that. So yes, we have had an increase in MLL students, but I wouldn't say that that's necessarily the salary drivers is not as a result of teachers who work in support of MLL students, if that makes sense.
Okay. So it's the contractual obligations that are continuing to drive the salary benefits kind of higher each year.
Correct. It's a combination of the salaries and benefits for those that are here, but we are also mandated to provide additional resources for like students with special needs, depending on their individual education plan. And so we add those positions because they're required. So that is also a driver of salaries as well, because we have to provide those supports for students that have those needs, in addition to the contractual yearly increases.
And I think another factor that had, am I okay to talk this way without the mic? Can people, I need the mic? I think another driver around special education is the cost of outplacement. Even though we've been really successful, this mic is driving me, it keeps, we've been really successful at bringing programs into the district, which has reduced costs overall. Those kids that continue to be outplaced are costing us significantly more than what we were paying in the past. And a lot of the drivers around that has been as a result of not having enough personnel in creating this enormous shortage in that area that yields these companies charging us more because they're recruiting individuals with a certification. And unfortunately, that has also been a significant driver for our special education component, besides the internal salaries and benefits that are increasing every year because of collective bargaining agreements.
Okay. So do you guys have an idea then? I guess the follow-up question more around, do you guys have an idea of what that's going to end up looking like over the next, say, 3 years? I mean,
the answer is yes. So at the conclusion of this budget, if you go to our website, we actually have a 3-year projection of what our budget is going to look like. So the 3-year projection takes into account the current staffing. It takes into account what projections for benefits, projections for salaries. So we do have a pretty decent picture. Even when we projected this year's budget last year, we were about 98-99% on target with where we anticipate to be, because a lot of these factors, to your point, are known.
The only factor that I think is an anomaly or an unknown for us is the factor on special education costs that are not controlled by us, but are outsourced. Any other questions? I'm gonna try to walk as fast as I can.
Ciao. Can you hear her? I know you've been working very hard to balance this budget, and there's a huge gap to fill that it looks like you're gonna have to take from human resources to achieve it. I guess some of the questions that I've gotten from quite a lot of parents are, have you looked at every possibility, every program before you cut student-facing positions? Because I feel like the most equitable thing we can do for our kids is have teachers in the classroom. If we've got study halls, if we've got kids sitting in study halls, the kids are going to suffer, the school's reputation will suffer. People ask about transportation versus school choice. Is that on the table? Why are we paying for it? I'm not saying I agree or disagree. I'm telling you the questions that I get. That's something we didn't have in the past. I've been in this school for years and years. School choice didn't even exist, but that's neither here nor there, but that's a big expense.
right? There are other expenses that we brought in. So are those things on the table before we start cutting classroom teachers?
So I think school choice has existed for a long time in the district, because when you look at CMS and CGS, for instance, they've been organizations that have been in the district for a long period of time. And choice has been available. The inequity that had existed was that some kids had access to it and others did not, because unless they had private transportation, they wouldn't have the accessibility to access the program. And we all saw that as a student-facing component. We've been very cognizant around how we were making reductions to limit the reductions happening in the classroom. Even right now, we basically eliminated the special ed supervisors and restructured that department to have almost a $900,000 reduction so that we didn't have to make that reduction in schools. So every effort that we could make, even when we started the reductions to get to the 9.7 at the beginning of the process, we started at central office first because we wanted to minimize the impact that we created for our kids in the classroom. Unfortunately, when 80% of your budget is people, when you talk about programs are people. And if we eliminate a program, that means we're eliminating the people that are supporting that program. And those people are student facing. So it's very complicated. Because if we eliminate a program, which you're talking about the busing, it is a ripple effect that will end up in the classroom. And we've been trying to avoid that as much as we can.
Quick question. So I've been on SGC not the same school, but several years. Yeah, I'm moving up with my kids, but I have so many. Jokes aside, I've seen a 5% gap about every year. So the growth of the school needs financially is outpacing the growth or funding from the city. So how do we disrupt that?
Yeah, sure. So part of it is looking at taking a closer look at our programming, right? And so I had a conversation with someone today about, we asked for 9%, we have set a new baseline, right, at 4%. So we kind of are doing that now. The question is, next year, after, and I think the gentleman talked about experiences of our students and our children, we will get to live that over the next couple of months and see how that experience is changing, how children are impacted. And then when we put together a budget for the next fiscal year, we, as a district, will have to make the decision that, do we want to accept that this is the current level, standard and services that we provide, or do we want to incrementally get back to where we were? But again, you're also handcuffed because 80% of your expenses are personnel. They're mandated, they're contractual, so you don't have a whole lot of flexibility. Our variable expenses of our total budget are maybe 7%, if you take out personnel. And even in the non-personnel, you do have contractual, you have custodial contract, you have busing contracts that you can't really change unless you eliminate those services and programs.
And I think coupled with that, part of our challenge is also that the rate of cost is more extensive than prior years. We are living it, right? Who was paying $25 for eggs? Right, like that's the reality that we're living in. It doesn't only live in our personal lives, it also impacts the work that we do in schools. And as a result of that, a lot of things that were costing us maybe half of what we're paying now is not the current reality now. And we don't know, even with the tariffs right now, what the potential impact is going to be on things that we've calculated a particular percentage increase for. It might be costing us maybe 20-30% more than what we were paying before. So there's been a lot of things that have been difficult to predict that have inflated our costs in the system, and in turn we've had to make a larger ask than we typically needed to. If you recall, also during the pandemic, there was a point in time where we had these contractual obligations increases, but we didn't get any increases from, an increase from the city. We were carrying that weight over time. And now this year, we're at the point that there's no resources for us to tap into, so we have to make reductions in order to balance that reality that was created at that point in time, coupled with the increased cost across the organization for services as well as supplies and resources.
I'm getting the signal that our time is up and we have two other presentations, but I also saw a hand starting to go up. Maybe we make this the last question.
How will the class sizes be impacted, and do you have an estimated number if they are to increase?
So class sizes will be at capacity based on contractual obligations. And that looks different depending on the grade level.
Thank you.
So the next piece that we have scheduled to present to you today is on our panorama survey. We're really excited to present this data because we've seen really great success in some of the practices that we put in place around mental health, and it's evident in the results of our panorama survey. So Diane Filardo will be presenting this data for us this evening.
Evening, Dr. Estrella, Board of Education, our school and district leaders, and members of our school governance council. I'm happy to be here tonight to talk about our panorama results. This spring, students in grades 3 through 12, our teachers, our staff, and our families participate. And this is the 6th year we've used the panorama survey, which is a climate survey. And we're obliged by the state of Connecticut to give an annual climate survey. Our surveys were available to all stakeholders in English, Spanish, and Haitian Creole. And we, as I said, this was the 6th year. The surveys are anonymous for our teachers, staff, and families. And school leaders and district leaders use panorama results to understand and act on information about social emotional learning and the perceptions of the quality and character of school life. Panorama surveys are used in about 21,000 schools in the US. We're going to begin by looking at topics by stakeholders. We're going to review some of the results and then examine trends. Our students in grades 3 through 12 take 2 surveys. One is an SEL survey, and the topics that are surveyed are growth mindset and emotional regulation. Students also take a perception survey on schools, on their support in schools and their environment. And you see the topics: teacher-student relationship, student belonging, rigorous expectations, engagement, climate, and school safety. Teachers take a perception survey, teachers and staff, on educating all students, the faculty growth mindset, staff leadership relationships, staff-family relationships, school climate, and school safety. And finally, our families have 4 topics: family support, school and district communications, school climate, and school safety. So there's a pattern here. All stakeholders, the topics that all stakeholders take survey in is school climate and school safety. So our response rates, just to give you an idea, when you see the N equals underneath the name of the survey, those are the number of stakeholders that did participate, and that's the percent. And you see over time that we're relatively stable. We've had a slight bump up in the school survey participation in comparison to SEL, but relatively stable. And we've had the smallest percent participation is for families, and that's pretty typical in surveys that are given across the country. It's important to get some sense of the survey design. The surveys, the questions, there are multiple questions, first of all, for each topic. And the questions are framed with a question and a positive framework. And you can see by the red outlines, the word connected is used in all the choices of responses. And where you see the check marks above the white connected and extremely connected, those are if a person answers one, if it uses those choices, that's a positive response. So the middle is an anchor answer, and the design is really like a Likert scale. So if you have the top 2 out of 5 is your response, then your response is considered positive. So social emotional learning, there's 2 topics that were surveyed, and that's growth mindset. And we know that's the belief that our abilities are not fixed, but they can be developed through dedication and hard work. And then emotional regulation, which is important to develop the ability to manage your emotions. You see 3-year trends, and those percents are the positive percent of positive responses. We see grades 3 through 5, 6 through 12 in both topics. And there is a pattern across all surveys of a higher positive response in elementary versus middle school and high school. Now I hope you can see this, but to get an idea of questions and how they vary, you see the same topics at the different grade levels, but there's a few more questions in the upper grades. And one question that had the highest positive response is, how often are you able to control your emotions when you need to? And you see for elementary, 55% responded positively. And then at the secondary level, 54% responded positively. And we can see the positive responses by question and then overall. So overall, 48% of this topic was positive for students in grades 3 through 5 versus 45% in students for 6 through 12. And we see comparisons to where we were last year. So our elementary students, there was an uptick of 2 percentage points, and the percent positive remained stable at secondary. Now, switching over to the school survey, you see one topic is rigorous expectations. And you can see a very high positive percent, even though there was a dip of 3 percentage points, we see relatively high percent of positive response. And here you also see some of the questions. How often, when you feel like giving up, how likely is it that your teacher will make you keep trying? That response was 80% positive. How much your teachers encourage you to do your best? 84% positive. And overall, we have 77%. Now, looking at the same topic by grades 6 through 12, you see a small uptick since 2023 in the percent positive responses overall, but somewhat lower than the elementary school. And again, how much do your teachers encourage you to do your best? 65%. On the flip side of that, when you feel like giving up a difficult task, how likely is it that your teacher will make you keep trying? Still more than half, but that went down to 55%. School engagement. Here, we see relatively flat at elementary, around 55% positive for the topic overall. And one thing that, you want students to be engaged in school and then to think about or work towards topics even when they're not in school. And one question, when you are not in school, how often do you talk about ideas from your classes? That was the lowest positive percentage, and that was 35%. Looking at the same topic, grades 6 through 12. This topic was the lowest school engagement of any of the topics at the secondary level, with 27% positive response. And again, the same question, when you're not in school, how often do you talk about ideas from your classes? And that was low, that was 20%. And how excited are you about going to class? That was another one, 21%. Now, we're looking at staff leadership. This is excellent news. This really shows the development of these relationships over time. If you look at the trend from 2022 to 2025, you see a 14% increase, percentage point increase in positive responses. And overall, 76% positive, and that was an increase of 5 percentage points from 2024. And one question, how confident are you in your school leaders have your best interest at heart? That's 80%, up 5 points. The one below that, how much trust exists between school leaders and faculty? 65% positive response, up 8 percentage points. So this clearly is a point of celebration. Now, family responses, the topic of school safety. Remember, that was one of the topics that all stakeholders responded to in the survey. And here you see an overall response of 74% favorable. And you see in 2023, that was 66%. Now we're up to 74%. And you can see how the lowest positive response was, how often do you worry about violence at your child's school? And that was 43%. Again, these are families that responded at all grade levels, 3 through 12. They had students in all those grade levels. So at the beginning, we said that there were some topics, school safety and school climate, that are actually surveyed by all stakeholders. And you can see that for school safety, this is really cause for celebration. We see a healthy increase, whether you're looking at families, students in grades 3 through 5, or the students in 6 through 12, and whether you're looking at teachers and staff. Likewise, for school climate, you see a slight dip down to 79%, but still that's very high for family members. The students went up at both groups, 3 through 5, 6 through 12, and teachers went up a staggering 6 percentage points. And Panorama offers a breakdown. If you look at teachers at the middle school level, there was actually a 21-point increase for safety issue. So they really went way up. So you've heard a lot about the portrait of a graduate this year and the competencies. And two, this year we're really focusing on critical thinking. And there is a positive relationship. If you have a school climate and a safety school that's safe, it's really going to support that environment for critical thinking. Because the student will be able to take risks, challenge ideas, think independently, promote thought, and foster respectful disagreement. So this is setting the stage. Our strong perception of all stakeholders, particularly students, for school climate and school safety is very conducive to our goal to increase critical thinking within the classroom. So again, the positive trends that we saw, school safety, school climate, and our staff leadership relations. Our next step is really school engagement. We can't say enough about that. We have to have students in school. We've been addressing the problem of chronic absenteeism. And this really still needs to be the focus of a lot of our work. And also rigorous expectations, high expectations, not only that teachers have, but students have for themselves. So with that, is there any questions? Thank you for your time.
You have the mic?
I have a mic.
Okay, so.
So the last section or our last presentation tonight is really about our school governance councils. And every year they take on different tasks and different projects throughout the school. And this is really a culmination. We have people who will be ending their term on a school governance council, new people joining in the fall. And it's good to take stock in what went well and what didn't go well and what were some of the challenges. And I think that that is really some of the time that we're going to take tonight is to think about what was our biggest success as a school governance council? What were some of the challenges that we had? And then have an opportunity to share with some other SGCs, other schools, because I think being able to share with other schools, you get different new and different ideas that could then impact the work and the thoughts as you look into next year. And then you'll be able to set one goal, like top priority, thinking about next year. And you know, one of the things that a principal shared with me is I set this goal, I think through it, and then when we have our new SGC in the fall, we end up tweaking it sometimes. And I think that that's okay, because I think that having new members, it brings new ideas, new things, but always thinking about what's our next step. I know that one school last year, their top priority was really around IB. And that was going to be part of the work that they did throughout this year. And so that will be our time tonight, is reflection, thinking about successes, thinking about challenges, and then really spending some time just setting a goal for next year. So what I'm gonna ask is at your table, there's multiple schools, and just have a conversation. What were some of your successes and what were some of your challenges? And we'll take about 5 to 8 minutes. All right.
I got you, thanks so much. Sure.
If the principal gets a second, can they just scan the QR code to put the most notable success into our Menti poll so that we have some data that support this? And then we can share a little bit of it as we go in about 2 minutes. So I know people are deep in conversation.
Now I didn't.
So let's come back together. Some really interesting responses from the QR code that I just wanna highlight. And then I also wanna make sure. I'd like for a principal or an SGC member to share an idea that another school shared, that they said, you know what, that's something that I'd like to bring back to my school. So I think just from a successes standpoint, I'll start us off. People put collaboration, upgrades to campus, facilities advocacy, student government, school compact, implementing grant, leadership, student voice, increased school climate. Do I have someone who wants to share a challenge? I'd love to get one or two challenges. Oh, that has a challenge. Great. All right.
Really did talk challenges. We were very positive at this table. But I think we can piggyback off of one was some of our successes are rooted in some of the challenges that we faced. And so between Norwalk High School, we had decreased PSAT, SAT scores. We had high chronic absenteeism rates, and panorama survey results were showing that children did not feel connected. The two schools, although we did things differently, have seen an increase. Larry was discussing a high percentage increase in his PSAT, SAT for literacy this year. Same thing for PTEC, coupled with increases in students feeling connected and students feeling that they belong, which also impacted chronic absenteeism rates to have decreased. And so we were talking about those successes and the need to, well, initially we talked about how now this has created a momentum among our staff where now we're seeing the fruits of our work. Because I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. Keith mentioned that it sounds like work, which it is. But when you see the fruits of your labor, how motivating that is, and now we're on a trajectory to what was it that really worked and how can we continue the momentum in our schools.
And I think one piece that I want to just add, and Diane Filardo mentioned about the panorama survey, that third bullet point around somewhat connected, it doesn't count as a positive score. And if you were to really dive into the panorama survey and look year over year, which is something that I tend to look at, yes, we saw some really good increases in those top two bullet points, but that third bullet point saw a massive increase. And so like, yes, it showed 55% said this positively, but it was another 32% that listed a 3, which is somewhat connected. And I'm not saying that we're celebrating that, but it wasn't that people were in the bottom 2 scores on the panorama survey, which I think is another celebration piece, even though it doesn't come through as considered a positive ranking. So it's just something to really think about as we're looking at our data.
I think Llewellyn's team, I visited Llewellyn a few days ago, was doing a phenomenal job at looking at the efficacy of that. I know Llewellyn, I'm putting that on the spot, but your team did a great job about talking about the data and like looking at that, and you spoke about language and people really understand some of the things that you were thinking. I don't know if you want to share, but I thought you had a great process.
So one of the things that we took from the panorama survey was that our teacher growth mindset was not great. And we're going through a process next Monday to go talk about that. But what we did on this past Monday is we looked at the other questions for the parents that filled out the survey and the students that filled out the survey. We went through each question. And as the teachers were in the room, I called it my building leadership team, they were like, I don't think they understood the question. And that went very much into what I was thinking about, what the teachers might not have thought about how that question looked, because it looked to me like some of the growth mindset had gone down from the previous years. So it concerned me. And we went through that carefully with our ILT meeting and going into that through what we're going to do with the rest of the staff.
Any other challenges or something that a colleague or another SGC shared? I know that Principal Crouch was talking about it, so I'm gonna let him share.
Of course, Robert. Dr. Lewis and I, we both had the same concern regarding increasing more parental involvement, and not just from the SGC and the PTA. You're right, Dr. Stray, Mike is terrible. So we just have to make more of a conscious effort just to take advantage of any event, any chance that we get to make more relationships with parents, to make them understand and realize that after your child graduates from elementary, they need you more than ever. It doesn't stop. The continuum should be that they should be more involved, but you should be more involved in their journey with their education. So we have a couple of things that we're trying to do. Next year we have this community event, a community day that we're gonna have maybe the week after school begins, just to bring out as many parents as we can, just to say, listen, we need you. And it's just not my SGC and my PTA, I need everyone involved.
I think to add to that, one of the challenges that I think I'm seeing, and this is probably a bigger issue than just SGC or Norwalk Public Schools, is I lead a Cub Scout program. One of the problems that I see from a parental perspective is that there's just more demands on parent time. And so finding the time for an SGC meeting or a PTA meeting or another meeting after you've had a long day and a lot of uncertainty in your day is a real challenge. And so I think one of the things that I'm trying to do as a parent is to figure out where to spend my time to maximize the benefit for my child, but then thinking about how I make that a low lift for other parents that I'm trying to get involved in activities, because there's value in everything we do, but I just think there's so much of a demand on people's time that it can be challenging to get them to engage on something as fundamentally important as the future of their child's education. So I don't have an answer to that problem per se, but it's something I think about from an SGC a school perspective.
The one concern I have and I think about often is like when they leave the Norwalk schools and going into higher education, and it seems like there's been like some hostility or at least some more adversity as far as just nationwide, as far as who's going where, and you know, we obviously want our kids to go to the best schools possible, and I see neighboring towns and how many kids go to the great institutions, and then, you know, Norwalk kids don't have a lot of some of the advantages. They're not born on second, third base like these other towns. So what can we do for these kind of communities to give them a better shot to go to better schools? Whether that's, I mean, I don't know, but you know, maybe the SAT, if the SATs are a big factor, could we start trying to, even though it might not be ideal, but give, you know, teach towards that. Sports maybe is an opportunity for some kids. You know, I don't think these towns have better athletes, but maybe better programs that are getting them ready to get scholarships. I mean, just throwing ideas out there is obviously a lot, and you guys are much more qualified, but something that I don't think we should discount, because you know, if the environment is moving against us, what we can do to kind of take a step and move with it, you know, where I give the best chance, because I think the better schools they go to, the better chance they have to make a better living, have a better impact, and all this stuff factors in, you know, very cool. But try to share that and be positive, but you know, I think like Dr. Lewis is talking about parent involvement, they make a big difference. So hopefully, if people feel like they can have an impact by their voices being heard, maybe more people will do that. But you know, a lot of people are stretched thin, you know, and it's hard to, you know, parents are working 2 jobs, whatever, to try to get involved. So I wouldn't necessarily hold it against them for not being here. Sometimes they do the best they can. The kids healthy, safe, and fed, you know, and anything else is a lot to be asked.
Good.
So we are bridging programs around SAT prep, PSAT prep, and we've had a lot of success, particularly this year. But we had some significant growth that we'll share at the next board meeting. And we're gonna be celebrating a lot of our scholars in terms of the schools that they've gotten into, because many of our students have gotten into pretty prestigious schools, as well as the kids that have decided to go into the workforce, and just talking about their certification path and where they're going to. So I think we're doing some really great and creative things around that. Our athletes are phenomenal, and many of our athletes, like, you know, my kid is a product of Norwalk Public Schools, and he's on a athletic scholarship and doing really well. So we have a lot of success, and I think we need to maybe promote it more to show. At our next business meeting, we will be bringing those students in to celebrate them, because I think we have a lot of success. And even through the budget process, we were very thoughtful, making sure that these programs were not impacted in any negative way, because we know it's an avenue for a lot of our scholars to have access to scholarship and other opportunities.
All right, so our last activity is really thinking about what is gonna be the top priority for your SGC. And as you think about next year, what are you going to focus on? Obviously, you're focusing on different things and different things come up and you look at different pieces. But just thinking about your top priority for the 25-26 school year, you can have a conversation with your co-chair. It will take 5 minutes, and then people can add what they would like to have as their top priority as they're thinking. They can share with colleagues and other SGCs as well. All right.
I forgot to check it out. Oh, you guys are the best. I'm one of the great. I think I remember one time. Yeah, you had to kind of had to do it.
It took me a while. I miss black.
I would leave it at that. One more minute and then I'll wrap up. All right, so really interesting as we look and see some of the responses that came through. We have number one priority for the SGC next year. We have literacy growth. We have family engagement. We have building SAT culture, communication, parent engagement, playground, advocacy handbooks, talent show, attendance. So you can see there's a wide range of focus areas across schools, and there should be some differentiation based on the need of your school. And so as we start next year with our SGC, this is the place to start. As we wrap up this year, I wanna thank our SGC co-chairs. As we heard, there's so many things going on for parents. So thank you for being involved and taking time out of your busy life to be part of the School Governance Council. It makes a difference. I think we should give them a round of applause. Yeah, but some of you are still going to be, because it's a 2-year term. Look forward to seeing you next year. If you are exiting, thank you again. And I think that is all for us. And Dr. Shreya, would you like to round us up?
So once again, thank you for all members of the SGC, for the leadership in the room, for the parents after a long day. And I know you probably have 1,000 other things to do when you get home, for being with us through this process and for being part of this journey. I know it hasn't been an easy year, given a lot of our conversations, but together we can make anything possible. And despite the challenges that we discussed today, I think we have one of the best teams in this country that will help us think through some of our challenges and solve some of the most complex problems. So we have the right people in our team to do this work, and we thank you for the parents that are here for your faith in us in doing the work. Thank you to our standing board who provide countless hours in a volunteer basis to make sure that we're doing our work well and that they're representing our community well. Let's give our board a big round of applause, please. And with that, I'll turn it over to Madam Chair.
Thank you. Board, I want to open it up to the board for any comments for everyone here today.
I appreciate you engaging with the table that I was sitting with. I always like to hear comments from the staff and also from our parents so that we can get a better understanding about what you think about the school district, and I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing with me.
I appreciate the opportunity to share the information that you guys have given us today. It gives me the opportunity to give me the push for the things that you are pushing for, and I think that's very important. So I would like to truly thank you again for sharing the information that you have shared with us today. Thank you.
I'd like to lift up some of the comments that I heard at my table, which really kind of pulls things together, that the principals were having weekly or monthly meetings with the students just to help them feel more part of the school, and they were even inviting some of the leadership of the children who were in student council, like the president, vice president. They would be coming to some meetings and giving some presentations, and so just hearing a student voice and having meetings to not about academic, but just about being part of the community. That was really encouraging to me. Wonderful.
Yeah, it was really lovely to spend this time. Thank you for coming out. I know it's a tough time in the evening for parents. And as far as all the budget conversations I know you all are having that are really challenging, I hope we are in solidarity how incredible this has been. And I have a lot of feelings about how things are going. It's hard, and we get that.
I too want to thank everybody for coming, but on a different note too, my son was in P-TECH, and when we talk about how positive and things, our programs are moving forward, I'm very proud to say that my son is actually studying in Germany, and we were talking about how to promote the positive things in the different schools. So they're going to do a video recording of him in Germany, interviewing him about the program and myself as a parent. So there is so much in all the different schools that they're all very different, but they all have positive notes. And I think that trying to get those promoted so that the public sees that and other families see that, that is just an amazing, information. And thank you for being here. And also, the hours that we all put in, us included, you guys, it's amazing. But also, don't forget, if a parent says to you they don't have the time to come, just tell them to send an email, because we do read every single email that comes. And an email to us, to the city, to the mayor, to common councils, those are being heard and seen. And with that being said, motion to adjourn?
I have one more,
Oh,
sorry.
okay.
To the parents, I'd like to truly thank you for the parents that are here. Show the support and for the push. That's very important. I know that's something that I've been pushing for a long time, to try to increase the morale as far as our parents are concerned. And it's parents like you that can make it happen. So I truly want to say thank you. The time and the effort and your concerns. That's something that I said, that's my fight, that's my push. I will continue to do that. I'm here to do that. Thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you, Carrie, seconded by Ashley, time is 7:27. Thank you.
So.